Hey YouTube, this is Nathan with Team ECHS MiLE. I'm going to do a quick deck profile of my MiLE deck. This is after our regionals tournament. I managed to make top 40 with this deck, so hopefully I can improve upon it and go farther next time. Starting off, I run 2 effect failures to shut down cards like Dad and 6-Sam Kageki. The reason why is because they can destroy your whole field in the first turn. By having effect failure, you can just shut them down. Same with Inzectors. Staple card, I feel. Next, run 2 Warm Worms. I wish I could get another one. They are $10 a piece. Warm Worms effect is when it's destroyed by any card effect, whether it be yours or your opponent's. Your opponent mills 3 from their deck. So for Black Rose or Torrential Tribute, Dark Hole, this card can be used to win duels. Next, I run 3 Needleworms, which are $5 a piece. Needleworm is pretty good because it's face down, and then when it flips up, your opponent discards 5 from the top of their deck. So set it up as a trap for them to attack, or flip it up during main phase. 3 Shield Worms work with a lot of things. Shield Worm is a 4, so it's good for my XYZ monster, but Shield Worm's effect is when it's summoned, it's changed to defense, and your opponent mills 1 for each insect on the field. That also works with Needleworm, Wormworm, and Chainsaw Insect. I run 2 of those. They're 24 beaters. The only reason why they're in this deck is by their effect. When this monster attacks a monster or is attacked, your opponent has to draw a card. Next, I run 2 Morphing Jar 2s just to help clear out the deck of spells and traps, and it does some significant milling. Its effect is when it's flipped up, your opponent shuffles all of their current monsters into their deck or back into their extra deck, and then they shuffle again. Then they mill all their cards until they have the same amount of monsters. Only the level 4 lowers can be summoned, unless there's summoning restrictions. So what will happen is if they're spell and trap heavy, they'll just throw away half their deck. I managed to win a game at regionals with that, by milling 12 cards in a turn with just Morphing Jar 2. Morphing Jar, the original. Be careful not to run an empty jar mill deck because it's easy to beat. If you draw or your opponent draws into Prohibition, you can easily shut it down. I played in mirror match with empty jar and I won just by using that. Prohibition on Morphing Jar and AD Changer, so I'd be careful. But it is a good card. Used strategically, you can get a whole free draw and make your opponent throw away a good hand. Book of Eclipse, very good card for this deck, helps stall. When your opponent goes to attack or do something you don't like, you can chain this card. Flips all face-up monsters on the field to face-down defense position. At the end phase, they're flipped up, and your opponent draws 1 for each. The nice thing about this card is that it shuts them down, although be careful, if they have all face-down monsters and you do too, you cannot resolve the effect, so don't even bother. Book of Moon, staple card, flips a monster face-down for a turn. Used on Morphing Jar or Needleworm. 3 Cup of Ace, very good. Flip a coin, heads you draw 2, tails you draw 2. Early game, that heads for you is awesome. Late game, tails for them is awesome because they have to draw. Late game, of course, getting a draw can also be useful. So I usually get pretty lucky with that. Dark Hole, Mass Destruction for decks that swarm like Inzectors and 6-Sam. Card Destruction to throw away a perfectly good hand. Gravekeeper's Servant for stalling. When your opponent wants to attack, they have to mill the top 1 of their deck, so this helps with decks that are attack heavy. 3 Shallow Graves. The reason why is to bring back your flip effect monsters. When this card's activated, you ruin your opponent's special 1 monster from your graveyard and face down defense. Bring out Morphing Jar or Needleworm again. 3 Upstart Goblins. Most people let you use these because it's a free draw and they're up 1,000. I don't keep track of life points whatsoever in a duel because I don't have to. 3 Dark Bribes, a very useful card in any deck, but in this deck it's awesome. Managed to win a game with this on a Bubble Man beatdown. I attacked with Chainsaw, he activated Mirror Force. Dark Bribe, he had to draw a card. By Chainsaw's effect, he had to draw another. He only had 2 cards left in his deck, and then he went to activate Book of Eclipse, or Book of Moon to flip my monster face down, activate another Dark Bribe for the game. So, very useful card, negates the activation of a spell or a trap, and your opponent draws 1. Torrential Tribute. Very good mass destruction card. When a monster is summoned, destroy it. Good for Inzectors, good for windups, good for really anything that has to start a chain summon. You can shut it down. Mirror Force. Unfortunately, you have to set it for a turn, and it is when they attack, so it could be destroyed by Inzectors, but it's still a pretty good card. Destroys all their face-up attack monsters. Solemn Judgment. Very good card, staple card. I figured out that if I had run this in my deck, I would have won way more games. You know, shut down a whole chain, shut down some spells or anything. It is half my life points, but the objective of this mill deck is to never be attacked once, or very infrequently, to where I can use Solemn Judgment and not take a huge hit. Now that's my main deck. Here's my extra. I run 3 Wind-Up Zenmeister. Wind-Up Zenmeister is very good. When you detach a monster, it flips a monster on the field face down, and phase it flips it up. So monsters like Morphing Jar or Needleworm can get flipped down for a turn and flip them up. If you have 2 of these on the field, which you can easily do with Shieldworm and Chainsaw Insect, which are both 4s. Overlay for 2, you can use this effect twice per turn. You can get your opponent to mill 10 cards with 1 Needleworm, so it's a very useful card. I did make a specific side deck just for this deck, and the reason why I did that is because I wanted versatility, which is what I was lacking in regionals, I thought. So this is how I would run, not a side deck in general, but just a side deck for this deck, making this into more of a whole strategic deck rather than just, just a mill. So starting off, I run 2 Shadow Imprisoning Mirrors for Inzectors. Hopefully you'll draw into one and can set one first turn because they love going second. Shut them down for the whole entire game unless they have MST or Heavy. 2 Prohibitions, once again for Inzectors and anything else that focus really anything. I won my mirror match with against the Empty Jar by putting on 80 Changer and Morphing Jar. Very good card. 2 Necro Valleys with Chaos Dragons rising in popularity, wind up still being used. Dino Rabbits not so much, but in Inzectors 2, touching the graveyard is a very key part of the deck. Necro Valley shuts that down. The only time I need to touch my deck with touch my graveyard is when I'm using Shallow Grave, so I don't typically worry about it. Run 3 Macrocosmoses for Chaos Dragons and Inzectors. Once the cards hit the banish zone, they usually can't be used again. Chaos Dragons rely on being able to manipulate their graveyard by throwing all their cards away first into the banished. It's very difficult for them to do. 2 Dark Cores, a very useful card. Destroy any card on the field, or discard a card on the field and banish a monster. Very useful for shutting down a chain or something if you're worried about it. I have 2 Electric Viruses for rising popularity in Chaos Dragons. The only reason why they're in there is Chaos Dragons, and they're a pretty good card. Discard, and you get to take control of a dragon. Nice thing about this is it can't be negated like Honest or Effect Veiler. 1 Smashing Ground going to be replaced with Soul Taker. As of right now, I only have Smashing Ground. Lastly, Gores. Unfortunately, he's only limited to 1, but of course he's a very good card. When you take battle damage, special summon Gores and a token with the same amount of damage you took. Level 7. I use this card for 2 reasons. Either use Gores to protect your field for a turn, or use Gores to discard for Dark Core. So when you're siding for Inzectors, there's a whole set you can do. You can run Macrocosmos, Shadow Imprisoning, and or Prohibition to shut them down. You have 7 new cards that you can use to shut down the whole deck. Then for Chaos Dragons, you can run a few other things and shut down the whole deck. So the thing I built this mill deck around, my side deck at least, is for the metagame, but specifically in this mill deck. So I wouldn't necessarily run this whole side for everything, although it is a lot of the basic cards for side. I just feel like it would work really well in this deck. So that's my deck profile, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Rate, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you sometime soon.